I am Harrison, and I am 32 years old. It was supposed to be a simple, joyous Saturday afternoon celebrating my son's 6th birthday, but instead, it became the exact day I realized my family was entirely broken and completely beyond repair. While I was walking into the kitchen to grab a knife for the cake, I found my son's birthday cake smashed face down in the garbage can. My own brother, Julian, was leaning against the counter holding a craft beer. He looked at the ruined cake, looked at me, and sneered that my kid did not deserve it anyway. He laughed about it right in front of a dozen guests. But there is a secret they did not know at that moment. I already held the keys to dismantle his entire life, and today, they are the ones crying and begging for a second chance. Before I tell you exactly how I brought my golden child brother back down to reality and served him the ultimate plate of karma, hit the like button if you believe in justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to the moment everything shattered. The air in the rented community center smelled exactly like cheap pepperoni pizza, artificial cherry fruit punch, and the faint, nostalgic scent of floor wax. My son, Miles, had been talking about this specific day for exactly 3 months and 12 days. I know the exact count because as a single father who shares no custody after a very clean, straightforward divorce, his milestones are the only ones that truly matter to my existence. He was absolutely obsessed with dinosaurs. For weeks, I had meticulously managed my salary, cutting back on my own groceries and skipping my morning coffee runs, just to afford this custom 3-tier Tyrannosaurus Rex cake. It was a genuine masterpiece. The baker had spent hours crafting green fondant scales, sharp little sugar teeth, and a realistic prehistoric landscape made of crushed cookies and buttercream. It sat proudly on the center dessert table, surrounded by matching dinosaur balloons and paper plates. I left that table unguarded for less than 2 minutes. A little girl named Lily had tripped near the bouncy castle, and I rushed over to help her tie her shoelaces and wipe her tears. When I walked back toward the dessert station to finally cut the cake and sing happy birthday, I stopped dead in my tracks. The table was completely empty. The centerpiece of my son's entire year was just gone. I blinked repeatedly, trying to process the visual anomaly. My initial thought was that the venue staff had moved it to the back kitchenette to prepare it for slicing. I pushed through the swinging wooden doors of the kitchen, expecting to see a smiling employee holding a cake knife. Instead, I was met with a scene that still burns hot in my chest every single time I close my eyes. The green fondant was smeared violently across the inside of the large, industrial stainless steel trash can. The beautifully sculpted T-Rex head was completely decapitated, drowning face down in a puddle of discarded diet soda, half-eaten pizza crusts, and dirty, crumpled paper napkins. The cake was entirely annihilated. Standing right next to that trash can was my younger brother, Julian. He is 28 years old, the undisputed golden child of our family, wearing a pristine designer polo shirt that likely cost more than the entire budget I had scraped together for this party. He was leaning casually against the counter, scrolling through his phone with his thumb, completely and utterly unbothered by the destruction at his feet. I felt a cold rush of adrenaline flood my veins. I asked him what happened to the cake. My voice was eerily steady, but my hands were shaking so aggressively that I had to grip the edge of the aluminum counter to anchor myself to reality. Julian did not even bother to look up from his bright smartphone screen. He simply shrugged his shoulders in a slow, exaggerated motion. He said he was walking past the table, bumped into the edge, and the cake just slid right off into the garbage. It was a blatant, unapologetic lie. The trash can was a good 10 feet away from the dessert table. You do not accidentally bump a heavy, 3-tier cake 10 feet across a room and directly into the bottom of a deep trash bin. I asked him again, my voice dropping an octave, demanding the truth. He finally locked the screen of his phone, slipped it into his expensive slacks, and looked at me. A familiar, arrogant smirk slowly spread across his face. It was the same smirk he used when he broke my toys as a child and knew he would never face a single consequence. He told me to relax. He told me it was just a stupid cake, and that I was embarrassing myself by getting so worked up over baked goods. Then, he leaned forward, looked me dead in the eye, and told me that my 6-year-old son did not deserve a cake that expensive anyway. He said Miles was getting too spoiled and needed to learn that he does not get everything he wants in life. I gripped the edge of the countertop until my knuckles turned completely white, the metal biting painfully into my skin. The urge to lunge forward, grab him by his designer collar, and throw him out the back door was overwhelmingly powerful. The anger was a physical pressure in my skull. But right at that moment, the swinging doors cracked open slightly, and I heard the sound of children laughing from the main hall. I heard Miles's voice ringing out, pure, innocent, and filled with absolute joy. If I started a physical altercation right there in the kitchen, the police would be called. The party would end in tears. I would become a terrifying memory in my son's mind on his special day. I refused to let Julian take my dignity the way he took that cake. I did not say a single word in response. I turned my back on my brother, walked out of the kitchen, and immediately began gathering our things. I packed up the leftover party favors and quietly approached the other parents. I faked a polite smile and told them that Miles was suddenly feeling a bit under the weather with a stomach ache, and that we needed to wrap things up early. I ushered my son out the front doors before Julian or anyone else from my family could say another word to him. During the car ride back to our house, the silence in the vehicle was deafening. Miles sat in the back, secured in his booster seat, tightly clutching a small plastic dinosaur that had come from one of the gift bags. He looked out the window and quietly asked me why we had to leave before we got to eat the big dinosaur cake. I swallowed the massive lump forming in my throat. I told him the bakery made a silly mistake with the frosting, but I promised him, looking at his reflection in the rearview mirror, that we would have our own private party, just the two of us, with an even better cake. He smiled a bright, trusting smile. That smile broke my heart into 1,000 jagged pieces. He was so resilient, so good, and he deserved a family that actually loved him. The house was incredibly quiet when we finally walked through the front door. I ran a warm bath for Miles, read him 2 extra bedtime stories, and tucked him in securely. Once his breathing grew deep and steady, I walked into the dark living room, poured myself a large glass of tap water, and sat on the couch. I stared at my cell phone resting on the coffee table. I waited. I waited for my parents to call. I waited for an apology. I waited for someone, anyone in my family, to acknowledge the sheer cruelty of what Julian had just done to a small child. The phone remained dark. Nobody called. The silence stretched through the night, heavy and suffocating. I barely slept. When the sun finally rose, casting a gray light through the living room blinds, my phone suddenly vibrated. The caller ID displayed my mother's name, Margaret. I answered the call immediately, bracing myself for the apologies and the excuses. I expected her to say she had scolded Julian. I expected her to ask if Miles was heartbroken. Instead, I heard the sound of sheer, unadulterated panic in her voice. She did not ask how her grandson was doing. She did not mention the birthday party. She bypassed my son's existence entirely, as if yesterday had never even occurred. She demanded that I call the venue manager for Julian's upcoming wedding immediately. She was breathing heavily, her voice shrill and frantic, claiming the luxury estate manager was threatening to cancel the entire booking because of a payment dispute Julian had caused. She told me I needed to step in, use my good credit, and talk the manager off the ledge before Julian's fiancée found out and called off the engagement. I sat completely frozen on the edge of my couch. Less than 24 hours after my brother threw my son's birthday cake in the garbage, my own mother was ordering me to clean up his mess and save his extravagant wedding. I interrupted her frantic rambling. I asked her, very calmly, if she had absolutely anything to say about what happened yesterday afternoon. She let out a loud, dramatic sigh into the receiver. She told me I was being overly sensitive and holding on to petty grudges. She said Julian was just under a massive amount of stress because of the wedding planning, and that family needs to stick together during difficult times. She actually told me to be the bigger person and stop making everything about myself. I did not argue. I did not yell. I pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red end call button, and set the device face down on the table. That was the exact moment the heavy, lifelong blinders finally fell off my eyes, and I saw my family for the toxic, irredeemable parasites they truly were. To truly understand the sheer, mind-boggling audacity of my mother's phone call that morning, you have to understand the deeply warped dynamic I grew up surviving. I was never treated as a son. I was the practice child. Julian was the undeniable miracle. From the exact moment Julian was brought home from the hospital, all family resources, both emotional and financial, were funneled directly to him. If we had a family dinner, Julian was served the first and largest portion. If it was Christmas morning, Julian's brightly wrapped gifts took up the entire living room floor, overflowing with the newest gaming consoles and expensive sports equipment. I, on the other hand, was handed highly practical, joyless items like winter socks, discount school supplies, or second-hand jackets. I was systematically taught early on that my sole purpose in the household was to be the quiet, unproblematic foundation upon which Julian could continuously build his fragile ego. My Aunt Sylvia was arguably the worst enabler of this toxic behavior. She loved to play the role of the benevolent peacekeeper, which in our family was just a polite, socially acceptable word for a master manipulator. Whenever Julian maliciously broke my favorite toys, or when I caught him stealing the hard-earned cash from my childhood piggy bank, Aunt Sylvia would inevitably pull me aside. She would place a warm, heavy hand on my shoulder, look at me with fake sympathy, and tell me that being the older brother meant making noble sacrifices. She conditioned me to believe that demanding basic respect or holding Julian accountable for his actions was a direct act of betrayal against the sacred bond of family. By the time we both reached adulthood, the financial disparity between us was staggering and impossible to ignore. When my grandfather passed away, he left a modest inheritance that was explicitly supposed to be split equally between the two of us. Instead of honoring his final wishes, my parents cornered me in the kitchen after the funeral. They used every guilt trip tactic in their arsenal to convince me to sign my portion of the money over to them, claiming they needed to help Julian start a new tech business. They promised it was a family investment. I foolishly signed the papers. That brilliant business venture completely failed in less than 6 months because Julian immediately spent the capital on a luxury sports car and weekend trips to Las Vegas. I never saw a single dime of my grandfather's money again. I was forced to pay my own way through state college. I worked grueling night shifts at a massive logistics warehouse, sleeping 3 hours a night just to afford my textbooks and rent. Meanwhile, Julian had his exorbitant private university tuition fully covered by our parents. He failed out entirely in his sophomore year because he refused to attend morning classes. I swallowed my pride for years. I focused entirely on my career trajectory. I secured a solid, well-paying job in corporate logistics, bought a modest but comfortable piece of real estate in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and poured every ounce of my energy into raising Miles after my divorce. My ex-wife and I had realized we were better as friends, and I took on full custody to provide him with total stability. I built a safe, quiet, predictable life. But to my parents and my brother, my hard-won stability was viewed as nothing more than a convenient, unlimited safety net for Julian's endless stream of reckless behavior. 2 days after the disastrous birthday party incident, the heavy oak doorbell of my house rang sharply. I opened the door to find my father, Richard, standing on my front porch. He did not wait for an invitation to enter. He pushed past my shoulder and walked straight into my living room, looking around the space with an expression of deep, visible disapproval, as if my home was beneath his standards. My father is a man who operates purely on intimidation and physical presence. He firmly believes that sheer volume equals absolute authority. He turned to face me, jabbing a thick, calloused finger aggressively in my direction. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not ask to see his grandson. He launched straight into a loud, aggressive lecture about my blatant refusal to help manage Julian's wedding venue crisis. He called my reaction to the ruined birthday cake pathetic and unmanly. He waved his hand dismissively, stating that kids are resilient and that Miles would completely forget about a stupid baked good in less than a week. Then, without taking a breath, he laid out his actual terrifying demand. He wanted me to open my wallet. He knew through the family grapevine that I had received a recent, substantial salary promotion at work. He aggressively demanded that I cover the final $12,000 payment for Julian's luxury venue. He casually admitted that he and my mother had completely maxed out their own retirement credit cards buying Julian's overly demanding fiancée a custom-designed, 3-carat diamond engagement ring. I stood perfectly still, staring at the man who had helped bring me into this world. He was standing in the middle of my safe haven, openly insulting the intelligence and feelings of my child, and forcefully demanding my hard-earned salary to fund a lavish, drunken party for the exact man who had just traumatized my son. I squared my shoulders, looked my father dead in his angry eyes, and said 2 words, "Absolutely not." His face instantly turned a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. The veins in his thick neck bulged. He took a heavy step closer, puffing out his chest, trying to use his height and physical bulk against me. It was an intimidation tactic that might have worked perfectly when I was a frightened 14-year-old boy, but it was completely useless against a grown man who had spent the last decade fighting his own battles. He raised his voice to a booming shout. He told me I was being incredibly selfish and deeply arrogant. He declared that a real family sacrifices for each other, and if I did not write that check immediately, I was going to intentionally ruin the most important and beautiful day of my brother's entire life. I did not flinch. I told him, with absolute icy precision, that Julian had already intentionally ruined my son's special day, and that the front door was located exactly right behind him. My father stood frozen for a second, genuinely shocked that I had not folded under his pressure. Then his shock morphed into pure rage. He spat a string of vile curses at me, warning me that there would be severe, permanent consequences for turning my back on my own blood. He turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the heavy front door so hard that the framed photographs hanging on the hallway wall violently rattled against the plaster. I stood alone in the hallway, listening to the screech of his tires as he sped out of my driveway. I was breathing heavily, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt a strange, intoxicating mixture of sheer terror and absolute, undeniable liberation. For the first time in 32 years, I had finally established a boundary. I had finally said no. But as I stood there in the quiet of my home, I grossly underestimated the malicious, vindictive lengths my parents would gladly go to in order to protect and fund their golden child. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly wrong. The real, devastating storm hit exactly 4 days later on a dreary, rain-soaked Tuesday afternoon. I had just driven home from picking Miles up from his elementary school. I was standing in the kitchen, sorting through the Daily Mail while Miles sat happily on the living room rug, building an elaborate fortress out of colorful plastic blocks. Mixed in with the usual glossy grocery store flyers and mundane utility bills was a thick, heavy envelope. It had no return address, just my name written in my mother's unmistakable, looping cursive handwriting. Felt unnaturally heavy in my hands. I slid my thumb under the flap and tore it open at the kitchen island. Inside the envelope was a single, neatly folded handwritten letter on my mother's custom stationery, and a multi-page official bank statement. My blood ran completely cold as my eyes scanned the top of the bank document. It was the detailed ledger for a high-yield joint savings account my parents had opened 7 years ago. When Miles was first born, my parents had made a massive theatrical public show of setting up a dedicated college fund for their only grandson. They paraded the official banking folders around at Thanksgiving dinners and neighborhood HOA meetings, aggressively soaking up praise and admiration from extended relatives about what generous, forward-thinking grandparents they were. They deposited the initial seed money, but over the ensuing years, it was me who carried the weight. Every single month, I had diligently transferred a significant portion of my own salary into that specific account. I gave up vacations, I drove an aging sedan, and I wore cheap suits, all to ensure that when Miles turned 18, he would never have to take out predatory student loans. However, because my name was not officially listed on the primary account header, a technicality my father had heavily insisted on years ago, falsely claiming it would provide better tax benefits for my yearly returns, I had absolutely no legal authority or control over the withdrawals. The statement I was currently holding in my trembling hand showed an available balance of exactly $0.00. My eyes darted down to the recent transaction history. A massive, singular withdrawal of $38,500 had been executed exactly 3 days ago. I slowly unfolded my mother's letter. Her handwriting was neat, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. She wrote that because I was being so incredibly stubborn, hostile, and unsupportive of the family during a critical time, she and my father had been left with absolutely no other choice but to forcibly reallocate the family resources. They had walked into the bank and completely drained my son's entire college fund to pay the deposits for Julian's luxury catering company, the imported floral arrangements, and the elite wedding photographer. The final paragraph of the letter was the most deeply offensive thing I had ever read in my life. It read, "We truly hope you will drop this petty grudge, act like a mature adult, and still come to the wedding to put this ugliness behind us. Julian is willing to forgive you for your behavior. Julian forgives me." I had to grab the edge of the granite counter with both hands to keep my knees from buckling. They did not just steal money. They committed an act of generational theft. They stole my young son's future. They blatantly stole the exact money I had sacrificed my own daily comforts to save. Also, Julian could have imported out-of-season orchids and a premium, top-shelf open bar at his ridiculous reception. Suddenly, my cell phone buzzed loudly against the countertop. It was a text message notification from Julian. I opened it. It was a high-resolution selfie of him and his fiancée sitting in a plush booth, doing a premium cake tasting at one of the most expensive bakeries in the city. They were holding up crystal champagne flutes. The caption underneath read, "Thanks for finally stepping up and funding the big day. Bro knew you'd eventually see reason and do the right thing." The sheer, unapologetic sociopathy of the entire situation literally took my breath away. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone against the wall. I did not break down in tears. Instead, a terrifying, icy, absolute calm washed over every single nerve in my body. I carefully folded the bank statement, placed it back into the envelope, and slid it into a secure drawer. I walked out of the kitchen and into the living room. I looked down at my son. Miles was still sitting happily on the rug, carefully placing the final piece on his block tower. He looked up at me, his eyes bright and full of innocence, gave me a wide, gap-toothed smile, and asked if we could have chocolate chip pancakes for dinner. I looked at the boy whose future had just been robbed by the people who were supposed to protect him. I smiled back, forcing the warmth into my eyes. I told him we could have absolutely whatever he wanted in the entire world. That night, after Miles was safely tucked into bed and fast asleep, I walked out to my back porch, sat in the cold night air, and called my coworker and closest friend, Clara. Clara is a sharp, fiercely intelligent, no-nonsense woman who used to work as a paralegal for a corporate law firm before moving into our logistics division. I sat in the dark and told her every single detail. I told her about the smashed dinosaur cake, my father's aggressive threats, and finally, the stolen college fund and the mocking text message. Clara was dead silent for a long, heavy moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was as hard and cold as forged steel. She told me I had to immediately stop acting like a wounded brother and an obedient son, and start acting like a father fiercely protecting his territory. She pointed out a harsh legal reality. Going to a lawyer and filing a lawsuit to recover the college fund would be a massive, expensive, and drawn-out legal nightmare, precisely because my name was not on the primary account structure. They had legally outmaneuvered me. But Clara reminded me of something far more important. She said I had other, more permanent ways to completely sever the financial parasites that had attached themselves to my life. She was absolutely right. Wallowing in grief and betrayal was a luxury I could no longer afford. I needed a flawless strategy. I needed to build an impenetrable fortress around my son and ensure my family could never, ever reach out and touch us again. The blinding anger inside me stopped burning like a wild, chaotic brush fire. It instantly condensed into a focused, highly destructive laser beam. I was completely done being the designated victim of their twisted, enabling family dynamic. I was going to let them hang themselves with their very own rope, and I was going to watch them fall. The necessary transition from a loyal, long-suffering family member to an absolute, untouchable ghost requires meticulous, cold-blooded planning. I started the very next morning, and I did not hesitate for a single second. My office phone rang sharply at exactly 10 a.m. while I was deep in a spreadsheet. The caller ID showed Miles's elementary school. It was Mrs. Albright, the head teacher for his kindergarten class. Her voice was unusually tense and laced with deep concern. She quickly informed me that my parents, Richard and Margaret, had just shown up unannounced at the front office security desk. They were aggressively demanding to check Miles out of school early, claiming they had a surprise family appointment to get him fitted for a miniature, highly expensive tuxedo for his uncle's upcoming wedding. A spike of pure, defensive adrenaline shot straight through my chest, making my heart pound against my ribs. They were actually trying to take my son without my explicit permission. They were attempting to abduct him from his classroom to parade him around as a cute visual prop for a wedding that was currently being funded by his stolen education money. The audacity was sickening. I gripped the phone tightly and told Mrs. Albright in no uncertain, absolute terms that my parents were strictly not authorized to take him off the premises. I firmly informed her that I possessed full, sole physical and legal custody of my son, and that if my parents did not leave the school lobby immediately, she was authorized and encouraged to call campus security and the local police. I did not care about causing a scene. I cared about a perimeter. I hung up the phone and immediately sent a highly detailed, formal email to the school principal, officially and permanently removing my parents from the approved emergency pickup list. Exactly 1 hour later, I received a rapid-fire barrage of text messages from my mother. She was furious, calling me ungrateful, dramatic, and deeply embarrassing, complaining about how humiliated she felt being escorted out by the school staff in front of other parents. I did not reply. I opened her contact profile and pressed block. I did the same to my father's number. I blocked Julian. I blocked Aunt Sylvia. I logged into my cellular provider's online portal and permanently severed their 3 phone lines from my family plan, cutting off their service effective immediately. I systematically canceled the premium television streaming services, the shared wholesale club memberships, and the emergency roadside assistance plans they had happily leached off of for the past 5 years. I then logged into my primary banking portal, opened a brand new, highly secure account at a completely different financial institution, and untangled every single shared financial thread we had ever possessed. I was scrubbing my existence from their lives. I was in the middle of closing a shared emergency credit card account when a new, unexpected email popped into my work inbox. It was from a man named Marcus, the general manager of the ultra-luxury estate where Julian was scheduled to hold his wedding. Julian, in his infinite arrogant laziness, had casually used my personal email address as a secondary emergency contact on the initial venue contract over a year ago, highly likely hoping that when the time came, the venue would just invoice me and I would quietly pay the deposit for him. He had completely forgotten to remove it. The email from Marcus was not a friendly, celebratory update. It was a formal, legally binding, final warning. Marcus stated in highly professional but extremely firm language that while a large, sudden payment had been made recently, the stolen $38,000 from the college fund, I realized with a bitter taste in my mouth, the final balance for the physical venue rental itself, a sum of exactly $12,500, was still 3 weeks overdue. Furthermore, Marcus documented several recent instances of Julian screaming at the venue's catering staff over the phone, demanding free upgrades and threatening them with bad reviews. The email concluded with a hard, uncompromising deadline. If the remaining balance of $12,500 was not paid in full by exactly 5 p.m. next Friday, the contract would be officially terminated, the highly coveted date would be released to the public, and all previous deposits would be completely and legally forfeited due to breach of contract. I read the email 3 times to ensure I was not hallucinating. I printed it out. I laid the crisp piece of white paper on my mahogany desk and stared at it, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Julian had foolishly blown the stolen college money on the extravagant caterer, the massive floral arches, and the luxury photographer, but he had completely neglected to pay the actual venue holding the event. My parents were completely broke. Their credit cards maxed out on the diamond ring. Julian was historically broke, and none of them had any idea that I held the official execution order for their precious, highly anticipated wedding rite in my hands. A year ago, I would have panicked. I would have forwarded the email to my parents. I would have warned them. A year ago, I would have likely taken out a personal loan and paid the $12,000 myself just to keep the peace and avoid a family meltdown. Instead, I opened a new draft in my email client. I typed a highly professional, meticulously worded reply directly to Marcus. I apologized profusely for my brother's deeply unacceptable and unprofessional behavior toward his hardworking staff. I clearly explained that I was not legally or financially responsible for the obligations of the event, but I respectfully requested that he continue to copy my email address on all future correspondence regarding the cancellation status, simply so I could be kept informed of the situation. Marcus replied within 10 minutes. He thanked me warmly for my professionalism, expressing his deep, personal frustration with dealing with Julian's constant tantrums, and readily agreed to keep me completely in the loop. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, looking out the large glass window at the bustling city skyline below. I had successfully established a direct, covert line of intelligence. I knew their exact deadline. I knew their ultimate financial weakness. I was standing perfectly still in the dead center of the eye of the storm, completely untouched by the impending chaos that was swirling dangerously around them. The preparation phase was officially over. Now, I just had to sit back, maintain my silence, and wait for the clock to run out on my brother's perfect life. The clock was relentlessly ticking down to that Friday deadline, and the absolute silence from my end of the world was clearly starting to drive my family completely insane. By Wednesday evening, the internal pressure within their toxic dynamic had reached an explosive boiling point. I was sitting at my large granite kitchen island, quietly reviewing some complex logistics documents for an upcoming corporate merger and checking my 401k portfolio. The house was peaceful. Miles was asleep in his room. Then, I heard the aggressive, unmistakable screech of tires pulling violently into my driveway, followed by the slamming of a heavy car door. I did not even need to look out the front bay window to know exactly who it was. The heavy, frantic, incredibly demanding pounding on my solid oak front door confirmed my suspicions. I calmly placed my pen down on the counter. I took a deep, steadying breath, walked over to the entryway, and unlocked the deadbolt. Julian pushed his way inside the house before I even had the chance to turn the brass handle completely. He looked entirely different from the smug, arrogant, designer-clad golden child who had maliciously destroyed my son's dinosaur birthday cake just a few short weeks prior. The visual transformation was genuinely shocking. His usually pristine, expensive polo shirt was deeply wrinkled and stained with sweat. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled and standing up in strange directions. There were dark, heavy, purple bags under his bloodshot eyes. Pure, unadulterated panic was radiating off his body in palpable, chaotic waves. He paced back and forth across my polished hardwood floor, aggressively running his hands through his hair, muttering unintelligible curses to himself before finally turning his wild, desperate eyes directly on me. He did not offer a single word of apology for his past behavior. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. He immediately launched into a frantic, high-pitched, incredibly demanding rant. He told me that our parents were completely tapped out financially. He said they had desperately tried to take out a second mortgage on their suburban house, but the bank had flatly denied the application because their debt-to-income ratio was completely destroyed by the custom 3-carat engagement ring and the massive, non-refundable catering deposits they had already paid for his big day. He said his fiancée was threatening to leave him and call off the entire engagement if the luxury venue was not officially secured by the end of the week. Then he stopped pacing. He looked at me with a sense of entitlement so profound, so deeply ingrained in his psyche, that it was almost breathtaking to witness. He aggressively demanded that I drive to the bank the very next morning and take out a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, against my real estate. He told me that with my excellent credit score, the massive equity I had built in my home, and my recent substantial salary bump at the logistics firm, the bank would approve me instantly. He said he needed exactly $12,500, and he needed me to wire it directly to Marcus at the luxury estate by tomorrow afternoon, no exceptions. I stood there, leaning casually against the hallway wall with my arms crossed over my chest, and I simply watched him unravel. I watched the golden child completely break down as he finally realized that his lifelong safety net had been completely, permanently severed. I kept my voice incredibly soft and dangerously calm. I asked him why on earth he thought I would ever give him a single dime of my hard-earned equity, especially after he and our parents had conspired behind my back to steal $38,000 from my 6-year-old son's college fund. Julian waved his hand dismissively in the air, treating the grand theft of a young child's future education as a minor, irritating inconvenience. He said the college fund was basically family money anyway, and that Miles had 18 entire years to figure out how to pay for a state school. He actually had the sheer audacity to suggest that Miles could just take out predatory student loans and work a minimum wage job like a normal person, while his luxury wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime VIP event that simply could not be compromised or downgraded. He pointed a shaking finger at my chest and told me to stop being a petty, jealous, vindictive loser, and to finally step up to my absolute obligations as his older brother. I did not interrupt him. I let him rant for 5 full minutes. I let him exhaust every single manipulation tactic in his limited arsenal. He tried heavy guilt-tripping about family legacy. He tried blazing anger and intimidation. He tried comparing our inherent worth, claiming his future wife's family would be humiliated if the wedding was downgraded to a cheaper location. When he finally ran out of breath and stood there panting in my hallway, expecting me to eventually break down, pull out my checkbook and surrender to his demands, I looked him dead in the eye. I said exactly one word. No. Julian blinked rapidly, his mouth falling open slightly in genuine confusion. He stared at me as if I had just spoken to him in a foreign language. He stammered, asking me what exactly I meant by no. I pushed off the wall, walked slowly into the kitchen, and poured myself a cup of black coffee from the carafe. I turned around, leaned against the granite island, and explained it to him with icy surgical precision. I told him I was not his personal bank account. I told him I was not his crisis manager or his dedicated fixer. I told him that he was a 28-year-old grown man who had coasted his entire pathetic life on the stolen sacrifices of others, and that the free ride was officially, permanently over. I told him he could either figure out how to work a second job and pay his own luxury bills, or he could lose his expensive venue and face the humiliating consequences. I stated very clearly that his financial ruin was simply not my problem. The immediate rage that overtook his face was genuinely terrifying. He screamed at me at the top of his lungs, the thick veins popping dangerously in his neck, telling me that I was completely dead to him. He threatened to hire a ruthless attack lawyer and hit me with a massive civil lawsuit for emotional damages and intentional infliction of distress, claiming I was purposefully trying to ruin his pristine reputation in the local community. He said our parents would legally disown me forever and immediately write me out of whatever inheritance they had left in their estate. I smiled a cold, humorless smile. I calmly told him that they had absolutely nothing left in their estate to leave me anyway, because they had already spent every single penny of it on funding his extravagant lifestyle. I also reminded him that launching a massive civil lawsuit would require him to have thousands of dollars for a legal retainer, money which he clearly did not possess since he was currently begging me for a home equity loan. I pointed firmly to the front door and told him to get the hell out of my house before I called the local police department and had him officially arrested for trespassing. He stormed out, kicking over a large, expensive ceramic potted plant on my front porch in a childish, pathetic fit of blind rage. Dirt and shattered clay scattered across the concrete. I closed the heavy door behind him, locked the deadbolt, and grabbed a broom to clean up the mess with a calm, perfectly steady hand. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No lingering pity, no deep-seated guilt, no fraternal obligation. The toxic emotional umbilical cord that had bound me to that family had been permanently surgically severed. The next 48 hours moved with agonizing, deliberate slowness. Friday finally arrived, bringing with it a crisp, clear, beautifully sunny autumn sky. I went to my corporate office, dropped Miles off at his elementary school, and attended my logistics meetings with perfect focus. But my eyes kept instinctively drifting to the digital clock on the bottom right corner of my dual computer monitors. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. 4 o'clock. 4:30. I knew the absolute, unmitigated chaos that must be happening in my parents' suburban house at that exact moment. I knew they were highly likely scrambling in sheer panic, making desperate phone calls to extended relatives, and frantically trying to secure predatory payday loans with astronomical interest rates. But I was completely, beautifully shielded from all of it. I had meticulously blocked every single technological avenue they had to reach me. At exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, on the dot, my email notification chimed brightly. The sound echoed loudly in the quiet space of my private office. I opened the inbox with a steady hand. It was an automated, legally binding, highly official message from the luxury estate's corporate management system, heavily copied to Marcus, Julian, and myself. The bolded subject line read, "Formal notice of contract termination and deposit forfeiture." The body of the email was cold, corporate, and beautifully uncompromising. It clearly stated that due to a complete failure to remit the final balance of $12,500 by the agreed-upon, legally binding deadline, the venue rental contract under Julian's name was officially, permanently canceled. All previous deposits, including the stolen college funds, were immediately forfeited to the estate to cover administrative costs and lost booking opportunities. The highly coveted Saturday date was now officially released back to the open public market. Julian's perfect, extravagant, stolen wedding was entirely dead in the water. I did not celebrate immediately. I did not pump my fist in the air or shout with joy. I simply picked up my cell phone, dialed the direct office extension for Marcus, the venue manager, and waited patiently as it rang. Marcus answered on the second ring, sounding completely exhausted and deeply stressed. I greeted him warmly and professionally. I told him I had just received the automated cancellation notice, and I wanted to ask a very quick, straightforward business question. I asked if the upcoming Saturday date that had just been forcibly vacated was still available for a private, immediate booking. Marcus paused for a long time, clearly taken aback by the rapid turn of events. He checked his scheduling software and confirmed that the date was technically wide open as of exactly 2 minutes ago. I told him I wanted to book the entire luxury estate for that exact same date. I clearly explained that I was not throwing a wedding, but rather a private, highly catered VIP birthday celebration for my 6-year-old son. I told him I was willing to pay the entire $12,500 rental fee up front, in full, by the end of the business day, using a certified bank transfer directly from my own personal savings and recent corporate work bonuses. Marcus let out a loud, genuine, deeply relieved laugh over the phone. He told me it would be an absolute, incredible pleasure to do business with a family member who actually respected his hardworking staff, communicated professionally, and paid their massive bills on time. Within 20 short minutes, the new commercial contract was digitally signed and countersigned. The money successfully left my secure account. The luxury venue that my family had maliciously destroyed my son's future to secure was now legally, undeniably, and entirely mine. I had quietly captured the castle, and the enemy had absolutely no idea they were already locked outside the gates. The weekend arrived rapidly, bringing with it a profound, deep-seated sense of absolute control. I had spent the past 2 weeks meticulously planning the complex logistics of the event with Marcus and his incredibly relieved, highly motivated catering staff. Because I had paid the massive invoice in full immediately and treated every single employee with basic human decency and respect, they were more than willing to bend over backwards to accommodate my wildest requests. They completely transformed the grand, crystal chandelier ballroom into a stunning, immersive, prehistoric wonderland. But before the actual celebration could begin, I had to deliver the final, crushing, highly public blow to the people who had actively tried to bury me. On the Tuesday morning before the big event, I sat down at my kitchen table with a hot cup of coffee, opened my smartphone settings, and temporarily unblocked the main family group chat. The digital chat had been dead silent on my end for weeks, though as soon as it synced, I could see dozens of missed, frantic messages from the days prior. They mostly consisted of my mother begging me to answer my phone, crying about ruined reputations, and my father sending empty, highly aggressive threats demanding family loyalty and financial obedience. I opened the official digital receipt and the signed contract from the luxury estate on my screen. It clearly, boldly showed my full legal name as the primary client, the exact date of the upcoming Saturday event, the financial status clearly marked as paid in full, and the official event title, Miles's 6th birthday celebration, private VIP event. I attached the high-resolution image to the group chat and typed a single, devastatingly calm, meticulously worded message. Since Julian's luxury venue was completely free and available due to his non-payment and contract termination, I decided to book it for Miles's official makeup birthday party. We will be having a massive custom dinosaur cake and full premium catering for our guests. You are all welcome to attend this Saturday, provided you can behave like civilized adults and offer a sincere, face-to-face apology to my son for intentionally ruining his actual birthday. I hit send. I watched the little green checkmark appear. Then, I set my phone face up on the granite counter, took a sip of my coffee, and watched the spectacular fireworks begin. It took exactly 45 seconds for the very first read receipt to appear next to my mother's name. Then, the little gray typing bubbles popped up frantically, rapidly appearing and disappearing as multiple people tried to respond at once. My mother called my personal cell phone less than a minute later. I answered it, putting her on speakerphone, resting the device on the counter, while I calmly continued chopping fresh organic apples for my son's school lunchbox. She was hyperventilating so hard she could barely form a coherent sentence. Her voice was a hysterical, high-pitched, entirely unhinged shriek. She aggressively accused me of being a cold-blooded monster. She demanded to know how I could possibly do something so incredibly malicious, calculating, and evil to my own flesh and blood. She screamed that Julian was currently sitting on the floor of his luxury apartment in a state of absolute, medicated catatonia because his wealthy fiancée had just found out the venue was canceled, realized he was completely broke, and was actively packing her designer bags to leave him. She screamed that I was intentionally, publicly humiliating the entire family by hosting a child's birthday party at the exact prestigious location where Julian was supposed to exchange his sacred wedding vows in front of high society guests. I stopped chopping the apples. I wiped the knife on a towel, leaned down directly toward the microphone of the phone, and spoke with a voice completely devoid of any sympathy. I told her that secretly stealing $38,000 from an innocent child's college fund was monstrous. I told her that throwing a 6-year-old's birthday cake into a garbage can, laughing about it in front of strangers, and refusing to apologize was evil. I specifically reminded her of the exact, callous words she had spoken to me just a few weeks ago, that family resources needed to be reallocated for the greater good. I told her I had simply taken her excellent advice. I had taken the initiative to reallocate my own massive financial resources to bring joy to the only family member who actually deserved to be celebrated. She began to sob uncontrollably through the speaker, begging me to call the venue, cancel my son's party, and transfer the booking back into Julian's name. She desperately promised that they would eventually find a way to pay me back the $12,000, swearing on her life that they would make it right. She tried to use her tears and her maternal distress as a weapon, the exact same psychological way she had manipulated me for my entire adult life. I cut her off. I told her the booking was legally non-transferable per my strict instructions to Marcus. I also informed her that if Julian, my father, or she showed up at the venue gates on Saturday without a sincere, groveling apology, the private security firm I had hired for the evening would have them immediately arrested for criminal trespassing. I reminded her that my strict legal custody agreement meant I was the sole, ultimate protector of my son, and I would enforce that protection with extreme, unyielding prejudice. Then, without waiting for her response, I hung up the phone and permanently blocked the family group chat again. The absolute silence that followed in my kitchen was the sweetest, most liberating sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. When Saturday afternoon finally arrived, the weather was absolutely, stunningly perfect. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were brilliant shades of orange and red. I drove Miles to the luxury estate in my reliable, modest sedan. He was wearing a cute little button-down shirt and a bow tie, completely unaware of the massive victory this day represented. When we pulled up to the grand, wrought-iron security gates, the uniformed guard carefully checked my name on the exclusive VIP list, smiled warmly at Miles, and waved us through the pristine grounds. We walked through the massive double doors into the grand ballroom, and Miles literally gasped out loud, dropping his small toy car on the floor. The venue staff had gone incredibly above and beyond my wildest expectations. The massive, multi-tiered crystal chandeliers were dimmed perfectly, casting a warm, theatrical glow over towering, incredibly realistic dinosaur statues they had specially rented from a local movie prop house. The expensive round tables, originally intended for arrogant relatives and Julian's pretentious, wealthy friends, were now covered in interactive science stations, massive fossil-digging pits with real sand, and incredible catered food design specifically for young kids and their exhausted, grateful parents. My closest friend and confidant, Clara, was there, cheering loudly when we walked in. Along with her were the parents from Miles's school who had witnessed the horrible disaster at the original party. There was absolutely no family drama. There were no snide, passive-aggressive remarks from Aunt Sylvia. There was no booming, intimidating presence from my father. There was only genuine, unadulterated laughter, fantastic music echoing off the high ceilings, and the beautiful sound of children having the absolute time of their young lives. At the absolute center of the grand room, resting proudly on a spotlighted, velvet-draped pedestal, was the new cake. I had commissioned the most expensive, highly rated bakery in the entire state. It was a massive, 5-tier, structurally engineered masterpiece featuring an erupting sugar volcano with dry ice smoke, a flowing river of bright blue buttercream icing, and a stunningly detailed, incredibly fierce T-Rex made entirely of premium, imported dark chocolate. Miles ran up to the table, his little hands gripping the edge of the tablecloth, his eyes wide with absolute, pure wonder. He looked back at me, a massive, genuine smile stretching across his face, and shouted over the upbeat music that this was the greatest, most amazing day of his entire life. I stood quietly in the corner of the grand ballroom, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching my son enthusiastically cut the first giant slice of that massive cake alongside his friends. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace and vindication settle deeply over my soul. This opulent room was supposed to be a monument to Julian's massive ego, built entirely on the stolen foundation of my son's future education. Instead, I had successfully legally reclaimed it. I had transformed their site of ultimate betrayal and theft into a fortress of absolute, undeniable joy. I had won the war, but the universe was not quite done dealing out severe consequences to the golden child. The fallout from the publicly canceled wedding was absolute, spectacular, and entirely self-inflicted by the golden child himself. I did not have to lift a single finger, make a single phone call, or spread a single rumor to destroy Julian's pristine reputation in the community. His own rampant narcissism and desperate need for attention did all the heavy lifting for me. On the Sunday afternoon immediately following Miles's incredible, flawless birthday party, Julian desperately attempted to control the rapidly deteriorating narrative. He posted a massive, multi-paragraph, highly emotional rant on his public Facebook page. He played the ultimate, deeply wounded victim, claiming to his hundreds of followers that a jealous, deeply toxic and vindictive family member, had intentionally sabotaged his luxury wedding venue at the last possible minute out of pure spite and long-standing sibling rivalry. He dramatically talked about deep family betrayal, he talked about severe heartbreak, and he pathetically asked his friends for emotional sympathy and financial donations to a crowdfunding link to help him secure a new location on short notice. Normally, his carefully curated echo chamber of enablers and superficial friends would have instantly flooded the comments section with unquestioning support, validation, and outrage on his behalf. But Julian had made a massive, fatal miscalculation. He arrogantly forgot that the various vendors he had verbally abused, threatened, and failed to pay were also highly active, well-connected members of the local event planning community. Within 2 short hours of his desperate post going live, Fiona, the high-end, highly respected florist he had hired, left a blistering, completely unfiltered comment. She did not hold back a single detail. She explicitly stated for all his friends to see that Julian's wedding was officially cancelled because he was a financial deadbeat who routinely verbally abused the venue staff, aggressively demanded thousands of dollars in free luxury upgrades, and completely failed to pay his final $12,000 venue balance after stealing money for the initial deposits. She even ruthlessly attached a high-resolution screenshot of a late-night text message where Julian had called her an unprintable, highly offensive slur simply because she refused to discount her expensive, imported out-of-season orchids for him. The dam of public opinion completely broke after that single comment. Marcus, the highly professional venue manager, officially liked Fiona's comment from his business account, quietly validating her claims. 2 of Julian's own groomsmen, guys he had known since college, chimed into the thread, angrily revealing that Julian had been secretly, persistently asking them to quietly cover the exorbitant cost of his first-class honeymoon flights to Bora Bora because his parents were completely broke and maxed out on credit cards. The social media backlash was incredibly swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. People do not take kindly to a grown, able-bodied man publicly playing the victim when he is actively scamming local small businesses, verbally abusing service workers, and relying on stolen funds to fund a lavish lifestyle. Julian panicked wildly as the angry comments piled up. He completely deleted the entire post less than 4 hours later, but the catastrophic damage was permanently done. High-quality screenshots of the entire thread were rapidly circulating through our extended family group chats, his entire social circle, and the local business community. The carefully curated, deeply fake illusion of the wealthy, successful, untouchable golden child shattered into a million unfixable pieces overnight. The final, absolute nail in the coffin came directly from his wealthy fiancée. When she read the viral comments, saw the undeniable screenshots, and realized the absolute horrifying extent of Julian's financial ruin and public humiliation, she did exactly what anyone with a basic sense of self-preservation and dignity would do. She packed her expensive designer bags while he was out of the apartment, left her custom 3-carat diamond ring resting on the cold kitchen counter alongside a short note, and permanently moved back in with her wealthy parents in the next state over. The engagement was officially, legally terminated. There would be no luxury wedding, no grand venue, no catered reception, and no grand celebration of his ego. Julian was left entirely alone in his expensive, empty luxury apartment, surrounded by unpaid utility bills, maxed-out credit cards, and a completely ruined reputation. In a final, desperate act of flailing aggression, he attempted to threaten me with a massive civil lawsuit for defamation of character. He sent me a rambling, unhinged, poorly spelled email claiming he was going to hire a shark lawyer to take my house, my retirement accounts, and my legal custody of Miles. I forwarded the entire email directly to Clara, who actually laughed out loud in the corporate office break room. She expertly reminded me that absolute truth is a bulletproof legal defense against any defamation claim, and that any reputable lawyer would literally laugh him out of the consultation room the exact moment they saw his empty bank accounts and the undeniable paper trail of his unpaid debts. I completely ignored the email, entirely unbothered by the empty, pathetic threats of a defeated, bankrupt tyrant. While Julian's fake life was completely imploding in spectacular, highly public fashion, my own real life was taking off in incredible ways I had never fully anticipated. The major corporate promotion I had been relentlessly working toward for 3 grueling years was officially granted by Mr. Harrington, the highly respected CEO of my logistics firm. He called me into his spacious, glass-walled corner office, formally commended me for my flawless, highly profitable execution of a recent massive supply chain merger, and officially offered me the prestigious position of regional director. The immediate salary increase was incredibly substantial, pushing me into a new tax bracket, but the real prize was the generous stock options and the complete, unhindered autonomy over my daily schedule, allowing me to spend even more quality time with Miles. Furthermore, a quiet side project I had been meticulously coding in my spare late-night hours, an innovative, cloud-based inventory management app designed specifically for small businesses, caught the attention of a highly successful independent tech investor named Derek. He had seen a working beta version I posted on a niche industry forum. We met for an expensive business lunch downtown, and by the end of that very week, Derek had confidently written a massive check to fully fund the professional development, marketing, and official launch of the app. I was experiencing total, absolute financial and professional liberation. Every single moment, every ounce of emotional energy I used to spend stressing over Julian's endless crises, fixing my parents' catastrophic financial mistakes, and managing their toxic, demanding emotions was now being poured directly, efficiently into my own incredible success and my son's secure future. The stark, undeniable contrast between my steady, hard-won rise and their rapid, entirely self-inflicted downfall was the most beautiful, poetic justice the universe could have ever possibly provided. The quiet that followed the massive storm of the canceled wedding was entirely unfamiliar, but incredibly, deeply healing. Months passed without a single solitary word from Julian, and I was more than happy to let his angry, bitter silence stretch into eternity. I had successfully secured my perimeter, aggressively built my wealth, and created an impenetrable sanctuary for my son. But there was one final, lingering loose end that absolutely needed to be tied before I could officially, permanently close this dark, exhausting chapter of my life forever. It happened on a crisp, deeply chilly Tuesday evening in late October. I was sitting quietly on my front porch, bundled in a warm sweater, peacefully watching the colorful autumn leaves fall across my manicured lawn, when a familiar, aging, slightly rusted sedan pulled very slowly into my driveway. It was my father, Richard. He did not confidently storm out of the car like he used to do when I was younger. He did not aggressively puff out his chest or carry the loud, booming aura of a man demanding ultimate authority and total obedience. As he slowly stepped out of the vehicle, he looked significantly older, frail, his broad shoulders heavily slumped, his face lined with deep, permanent exhaustion. The immense financial strain of the canceled wedding, the massive interest rates on maxed-out credit cards, and the inescapable public humiliation had clearly taken a massive, undeniable physical toll on him. He walked slowly up the concrete steps to my porch, stopping a few feet away from my chair. He did not try to enter my home. He did not raise his voice. He reached a shaking hand into the inside pocket of his worn leather jacket, pulled out a thick, crisp white envelope, and silently held it out to me. His voice was gruff, quiet, entirely devoid of its usual booming, arrogant confidence. He simply told me it was a certified cashier's check for exactly $38,500. He looked down at his scuffed shoes and confessed that he and my mother had been forced to liquidate a massive, heavily penalized portion of their own meager retirement accounts to secure the funds. He looked away, staring blankly at the empty driveway, and muttered that he deeply feared I was preparing to bring a massive civil lawsuit against them for the stolen college fund, and that he desperately wanted the financial ledger wiped completely clean before they lost their house. I stood up slowly, took the heavy envelope from his trembling hand, and opened the flap. The official bank-certified check was indeed exactly the amount they had maliciously stolen. I looked closely at the defeated man who had aggressively enabled my abuser for 32 years. He was not sincerely apologizing for the deep emotional betrayal. He was simply, pathetically paying a financial ransom to avoid severe legal consequences and to clear his own heavily burdened, guilty conscience. I carefully slipped the check into my sweater pocket. I told him in a flat, emotionless voice that the money would be immediately deposited into a highly secure, heavily encrypted education trust that neither he, my mother, nor Julian would ever have legal access to again. I told him the financial ledger between us was officially clear, but the deep emotional debt and the broken trust were completely permanent and unfixable. I turned my back on him, stepped inside my warm house, and closed the heavy front door, locking the deadbolt with a loud, incredibly satisfying click. I never saw my father again after that cold night on the porch. A few short weeks later, the absolute final piece of closure arrived from the one person I least expected to see. I had taken Miles to a large, beautiful public park a few towns over, a place we frequently visited to enjoy the massive wooden playground structures and the open green fields. I was sitting peacefully on a green park bench, sipping a warm cup of coffee, when I saw a lone woman walking very slowly along the paved walking path. It was my mother, Margaret. She spotted us from a distance, immediately freezing in her tracks. She looked incredibly fragile, her hair unkempt and graying at the roots, completely lacking the manicured, flawless perfection she always used to project to the wealthy neighborhood HO. She hesitated for a long, agonizing moment before slowly walking over to the edge of the large sandbox, where Miles was happily building a massive sandcastle with his bright plastic buckets. I stood up instantly, my muscles tensing automatically, ready to intervene and fiercely shield my son. But she did not aggressively reach for him. She did not try to force a toxic hug or demand a dramatic family reunion. She simply crouched down at the outer edge of the wooden border, maintaining a highly respectful, cautious distance. She looked directly at my young son, heavy tears freely streaming down her aged, wrinkled cheeks. Her voice broke completely as she spoke. She told Miles that she was so incredibly, deeply sorry about his ruined birthday cake. She said it was a terrible, unforgivable thing that happened, and she was so sorry she was not a better, stronger grandmother to protect him from bad things. Miles stopped digging in the sand with his yellow plastic shovel. He looked at her with the pure, unfiltered, brutal honesty that only an innocent child possesses. He blinked his big, bright eyes, completely unaffected by her dramatic display of tears, and said in a clear, happy voice, "It's okay. You don't have to cry. Dad got me a much bigger dinosaur cake, and it had a real chocolate volcano that smoked. My dad always fixes everything, so I don't need the old cake." My mother's face crumpled entirely, completely shattered by the absolute truth. The innocent, factual statement from her own young grandson was the ultimate, fatal blow to her fragile ego. Miles did not miss her presence. He did not need her fake love. He knew exactly who his true protector was, and it was the very son she had maliciously marginalized, abused, and discarded her entire adult life. She stood up shakily, covered her sobbing face with her trembling hands, and walked quickly away down the paved path, disappearing entirely into the thick autumn trees. I did not call after her. I did not feel a single ounce of lingering guilt or sadness. I sat back down on the park bench, taking a deep sip of my coffee, watching Miles happily return to his sandcastle, completely unbothered by the ghost of a grandmother who just left. I realized in that exact, crystal-clear moment that the deep generational curse was officially, permanently broken. My son would never, ever know the soul-crushing feeling of being second best in his own home. He would never know the desperate, exhausting need to beg for basic love, respect, and decency from toxic people who were entirely incapable of giving it. I had bravely absorbed 32 long years of toxic family poison so that my beautiful son would never have to drink a single bitter drop. True peace does not come from keeping highly toxic people comfortable at your own expense. Peace comes from the absolute, unwavering willingness to completely burn the bridge that leads directly back to your abusers, and using the bright, warm light of those flames to build a much better, brighter future for yourself and the people you truly love. Thank you for listening to my story today. Have you ever faced something similar with your own toxic family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, uncompromising line in the sand to protect your own peace and your children? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.